And now we're on Daf Pei Tes Amid Beis. L'chad mipnei plan. So the call went out, the rumor went out that this unmarried woman received Kiddushin from the children, from a son of so-and-so. However, that so-and-so has many sons, so we don't know how to identify which son was the Makadesh. Omar Rov, afilu ma diyom lo vatlin kol b'hom vatlin kol meimer amri einibu rabbanu kiddushi and kiddushi kot. Rava says that here's an example of a case, a scenario in which everyone unanimously would agree that we are mevatel the kol. We don't take this kol seriously to aser al kuli alma, because we're going to assume that we checked out the kiddushin and which ones of the brothers was the makadesh. It was a katan, and kiddushin katan are not kiddushin and not valid, and she's still a pnui. Another story. There was a call going out about this woman that she was mikudeshes. Likata, to a person that we know is a katan. Even though Hanira Begadol, he's very tall, he looks much older than his true age, should be choshesh to this call and require a get from him, because he's nira kegadol, and people, spectators, will mistakenly assume that that kedusha was valid. We had a similar case, and the Chachamim Paskin, the Amru, they handed down a verdict. Adayin lo igia lepalgus Ruvain. What's plagos Ruvain? Shenemar, the pasuk says in Shoftim. Again, when it says Shoftim, please let's not make any mistakes here. It doesn't mean Parshas Shoftim, this week's Parsha. It means Sefer Shoftim. And it says there, Liflagos, Ruvain, Gedolim, Chikrei Lev. And the Chacham say that Gedolim that have 13 years, they have Chikrei Lev, they have Chacham. And this boy, even though he looks way older than he really is, because his goof is so developed and he's so tall, nevertheless, if you check out his meisim, you'll see that his behavior patterns reflect his true age. He doesn't have that chachma of laflagos ruvain of the gedolim. The Mishnah says that with choshesh l'kol bilvad shelo teisham amasla, Omar Rabba Barhuna, Amasla she'amru afilu mikad v'ad asar yomim. Rabba Barhuna disagrees, as we saw earlier, with Rabbi Yochanan, and he holds that even if the Amasla comes much later on, that's enough to be mavatal the kol. Rav Zvid Omar bimkom Amasla choshim Amasla. Even if we don't have a full-fledged Amasla, but nevertheless we have a Pesach, not an Amasla, but a Pesach. And the Pesach tells me, you know what, there's probably an Amasla. It's Choshen Lamasla. We're going to assume that in truth there is an Amasla, and we're going to be Mavatal L'Kol. So Rashi gives an example. Kigon, Sha'amru, Sheniskacha Bizrika, V'lo Amru Shenofla Kedushin Sofei Karvlot Zakar Lomikol Yesh Pesach Lomar Shema Achein Noflu Karvlot. When somebody throws Kedushin at a distance, we always have to wonder if perhaps the Kiddushin didn't reach closer to her. And that's a Pesach, even though we don't have the Amasla, and therefore Choshen Lamasla. Eis Feira popular of Zvid. Ubilvad Shalota Hey Shamam. Yeah, okay, that we did again. Amalei Rav Kahana Rav Papa. The At, and you went ahead and you made a diuk. that even if we don't have an Amasla Gemura, we have to have a Pesach. And then after Rav Zvid's diuk, we had a question of Rav Papa, that the Mishnah says, "U'bilvad shelo tehei shama masla." So this was a kasha that Rav Papa raised an objection to Rav, because it sounds like it's not enough to have a Pesach Hamasla, but the Mishnah simply means you need an Hamasla. And Rav Zvid responded in defense that when the Mishnah says Hamasla, it means Bimkom Hamasla. So what the Mishnah really means is Bilvad shelo tehei sham Pesach lomar Hamasla. And now Rav Kahana says to Rav Papa, who raised this question against Rav Zvid, the at lo tizbara, you don't agree that a Pesach Hamasla is enough to be mavatal the kol v'atnan. We have a Mishnah Yevamis Daf Tzadi Beis, a woman whose husband went out to the Dinis Hayam, and one witness came and testified that he saw the dead body of the husband, and Beis Din allowed her therefore to get married in order to avoid an Igun situation. This Kadsha, she received Kiddush from someone else, and her original husband comes back. And the Mishnah Paskins, Muteres Lach, so she's allowed to go back to her husband, resume her original marriage. She doesn't need to get from the second Mekadesh. And why weren't the Chachamim Choshesh that people will say that the first husband divorced her? Madulo Choshesh Chachamim Sheyomu Anoshim Girsha Harishon. Right, she went ahead and got married to a second guy. And even though her original husband is alive and well, they're going to say, Mistoma, he delivered a get to her. And therefore, when the second husband was Makadish her, that's a valid Kedushin. How can we matir an Eishes Ish without a get? What's Muteres Lachzol? And the only answer could be, Lav Mishum Damina al Tnai Kodesh. In other words, there's a Pesach La Masla. They're going to say that the first Mekadesh who went out to Medinas Hayam and gave her a get on the condition that if he doesn't return the get should be chal, and the Sheni was Mekadesh Aratnai, that if the first husband will return alive and well, then his Kedushin is Batal and Mavutal. I mean, I don't know why he needs such a Tanai, but anyway, he made such a Tanai. And therefore, people will understand why she doesn't need to get from the second husband. And that supports Rav Zvid's principle of Pesach LaMasla. So the Gemara answers, Shaidi Hossam, the Osi Bal V'Koma Aren. The din is different there. And it's not because in our masla, but because the Baal is standing in front of us, and people are going to say that he never divorced his wife. She thought that he had died. Now that he's returned, standing on 2 feet, the second Kedushin is not a Kedushin that's valid, and therefore she doesn't need to get from the second husband. So the 2 words here, Kama'ara, don't mean exactly what they usually mean, but rather it means that there's like a built-in amasla. That's what Kama'ara means. If the husband came back from Medina Sayyam and he's not dead, but he's alive, then people will say that, she thought that he had died. That's why she married the second guy. But the second Kedushin is not valid at all. Therefore, she doesn't need to get from the second guy. But it has nothing to do with Pesach La'amasla. It has to do with the fact that the Baal came back and he's alive and well. So the Gemara asks, if you're right, and people will not assume that the first husband gave her a get, And the second Kiddushin obviously is conditional on the fact that the first husband died, but now he died. And therefore the second Kiddushin is not valid at all. If that be the case, V'niseis Nami. Why does it say in the Mishnah Yevamos, Niskadsha? It should have said Niseis. Even if she was married off to the second husband, we should be matir to go back to her first husband when he comes back alive and well from Medina Sayyam. Because the Nesuin of the second husband is meaningless. So why does it say in the Mishnah Yevamos that only in the case of Niskadsha does she not need to get from the Sheni? But if she was already Nesua to the Sheni, she needs a get from both of them, and she can't go back to the first husband. It must be because we're afraid that people will say that the first husband was Megarisha, and then she got married to the second husband. And therefore, if there was only Kiddushin to the second husband, she can go back to the first husband, because people are going to say that the Kiddushin of the second husband was on Tanai. But if she's already a Suah to the second husband, then she cannot go back to her first husband, because otherwise we're going to say that they were Mater Neshasish without a get. Because in the case of the Nesuin, you can't say that there was Nesuin of the Sheni al Tanai. There is no Tanai in Nesuin. And by the way, just a footnote, the issue of is there Tanai Nesuin or not is a gigantic issue. And during the period of time which they had to be Mater Agunos, Rabbi Yitzchak Chanan Spector wrote an entire treatise called Ein Tanai B'Nesuin. And this Gemara seems to reflect that Ein Tanai B'Nesuin. So the Gemara answers on this kasha. Why does it say this kasha, not Nesua? L'chora, the same halach should apply to Nesua. She should not be required to get a get from the Sheni. She should not be asura to go back to the first one, unless you assume that people are going to say that the first Baal was Megarish. Gemara answers no. Everyone in the world, all the spectators, will agree unanimously that there was no get from the Rishon. And therefore the Kedusha to the Sheni is not worth a dime. It's meaningless. So what's the distinction between Niskadsha and Niseis? The Gemara answers, Niseis, the Avda Isura, the entire heter that she's allowed to get married and live with another man is based on Isha Daiku Mitzvah with one aid. And apparently she did not perform her due diligence to establish that her husband is indeed dead, is therefore Kansur Rabbanan. Rabbanan prohibited her as a punitive measure from going back and resuming her relationship, her marriage with her first husband. But Niskadsha, if she only had Kiddushin to the Sheni, de lo Avad Isur, she didn't have a relationship with him, is lo Kansur Rabbanan. And therefore she can go back and resume her marriage with her first husband. In order for a kol to be valid, we need that it was accepted by Bezdin. Bezdin is going to make the kol into a kol, which means that Bezdin is going to clarify through an investigation that so-and-so heard it from so-and-so, heard it from so-and-so, and the original two Eidim went to Medina Sayyam, as we explained on Daf Pei Tesam and Aleph. And furthermore, the Omar of Ashi, Kol Kol de Bosan Lo Chayshin Lo, a kol that goes out after a woman was already married off. What does that mean? The rumor has it that this woman who got married to, let's call him Shimon, had already received Kiddushin from Reuven before Shimon married her with Nesuah. Lo chayshinah. Such a kol does not register, it's not valid. In other words, we're not going to aser al baila, based on the fact that she was niskadsha li'odam acher kodem hanesuin, and she doesn't need a get from that person about whom the rumor says she received kedushin. And all this is because the kol was yotze after she got married to someone. And then the kol says, well, she was already married to someone earlier. So Gemara is medayik in the words of Rav Ashi. But the Basa Erisin Chayshinale, why did Rav Ashi formulate his ruling in a case of kol de Basa Nesuin? Apparently, if it was only a kol de Basa Erisin, meaning that when she went ahead and got married, she didn't go to the stage of chuppah, of Nesuin, but rather kedushin. And now the kol goes out that she already was mekudeshes to someone else before the kedushin to the sheni. In such a case, she needs a get from both the rishon and the sheni. Even if the kol went out after she received erisin, it's not a valid kol, and we're not choshish for such a kol, and we don't require a get from the rishon. And we're going to allow the marriage to the sheni to continue. The hilchasa, and we paskin like Rav Chaviva, lo chayshin lo. We're not choshish to a kol, even if it's yotzei achara erisin. A question was transmitted from the Beis Medrash and the Talmidim of the Beis Medrash of Rav to Shmuel. Yamdeinu Rabbeinu teach us. Yatsa ole kol mirishon. There's a kol, a rumor that goes around, that's circulating about a pnuya that she got married to so and so, and then afterwards, uba acher v'kitsha kedushay Torah. And now someone goes ahead and he was mekadisha kedushin gmurin in front of Eidim Mal. Are we choshish to the kol and she's not allowed to be married to the sheni, or are we not choshish to the kol? Shalach lahu teitze. We have to break up the marriage to the sheni, but only on a temporary basis. Hamidu adover al burio. Then we're going to check out and see if this is really a kol emes. We have to freeze the marriage to the sheni, and then clarify the truth. Was she niskadsha to someone else before the sheni was makadisha? Vodiuni, and let me know what are the results of your investigation. It's like, I remember I once asked Rav Soloveitchik a question, and he didn't give me an answer. And for weeks and weeks, I kept calling him, and he refused to give me an answer. So finally, I got smart, and I said, Rebbe, do you want me to ask somebody else? He said, I think that's a good idea. But, he said, tell me who you're going to ask. I told him, at that time it was Rav Gedalia Felder from Toronto. And he said, let me know what he answers you. That was the condition. I had to transmit the answer of Rav Gedalia Felder. So what was this, when Shmuel said, check it all out, what was he actually investigating? If he meant to say that we will establish that this first so-called Kedushin, about which there's a rumor that she was Mekadosh, is not really valid Kedushin, Mevaklin Kola, then Shmuel is saying in that case, we're going to be Mevatel the Kol. Wait a minute, where was Shmuel? For Narda Asri the Shmuel. Shmuel came from Narda. And what was the minig in Narda? V'lo mevatle kol. They're not mevatel a kol, even if we find out that the kol is not reliable. And that's what we had on Omen Aleph. Ella, but rather, there's no question that when Shmuel says that we have to investigate it, the Megalia Milsa, the Kedushi Kama, Kedushi Ma'alyaninu, that we're going to clarify that this kol was really a true rumor. and she was married off to the Kama. And we don't need to worry about the Kedusha to the Sheni, because she's already Mekudesh to the Rishon, and you can't be Mekadesh and Eshesish. Lo tzricha get me Sheni. Upligi the Rav Huna, and Shmuel is disagreeing with Rav Huna. The Rav Huna Eshes Isha Poshti Adem Kibla Kedusha Be'acher Mekudeshes. If a married woman accepts Kedusha from another husband, she needs a get from the second husband. Rav Hamnuna, based on the logic of Rav Hamnuna, Tiyam Rav Nuni Sheshomer L'Baila Gerash Tani, Nemenes, Chazak Eni Shemiza Panev B'nei Baila. So just like a woman who says in the presence of her husband that you divorced me, and she's believed because Eni Shemeiza, so too in the case where she went ahead and she accepted Kedusha from a Sheni, Ein L'cha Ha'oza Gedola Mizu. She must be implying that she received a get from the Rishon, and therefore she needs a get from the Sheni. Ve'idach, and Shmuel, who rejects Rav Huna, and he holds she doesn't need a get from the Sheni. He's going to say that Rav Hamnuna is not a proof to the conclusion of Rav Huna. Why? Kiyat mind Rav Hamnuna. When did Rav Huna say, "Eina isha me'iza panefnei baila"? That's only the fun of the Baal is there, and she says to the Baal, looking him in the eyes, "You gave me a get." But Shalom fun of Miza, she can always create a story about a get if he's not present. And therefore, in the case where she was Makabel Kiddushin from somebody else, Shalom B'fnei Baila, Shmuel argues she's not believed, and she doesn't need a get from him. Meaning from the Sheni. Because we assume that since she was Makabel Kiddushin from the Rishon, she's married to the Rishon. And we don't apply the principle of Ein Isha Be'iza Paneh Chazok, because here is Shalom B'fan. Now the Gemara goes back to the Psak Din of Shmuel when he said, "Hamidu Davar al Burio Lo Matzu Davar al Burio Ma." What's the din if they weren't able to trace the coal back to its original source? Amrav Huna Megarish Rishon V'Nosei Hashem. The halacha requires that the first Makadesh, and we only know about his Kiddushin from a coal, and we weren't able to clarify the coal, that Kiddushin requires a get. Once she receives a get from the Rishon, then she can marry the Sheni. Again, only if he wants it. Getting a get from the Sheni and not from the Rishon, we're not going to be matu. We're not going to allow her to resume her relationship with the first Makadesh, because the Kol has it, and people believe that the first Makadesh actually was Makadesh Arba Kedushin Gemurim. And therefore, even if the Sheni gives her a get, she would be resuming a marriage with her first husband after she was married to a second husband, and that's called Machzir Gushoso. My timer, people are going to tell us that Machzir Gushoso is permissible, that she could resume her marriage with her first husband after she gets a get from the second husband, which is not so. Rav Shinin Obreid, Rav Idi Omer, he has a dissenting view. Af Megari Sheni V'Nosei Rishon. Let the second one give a get, and let her go back to the first husband. And no one's going to say that he's being Machzir Gushos. Why? Meimar Omri, the people will say, Aini Rabbanan V'Kedushin, and they checked out the first Kedushin to the first husband. Kedushin Tosav. The Chacham clarified it, and they came to the conclusion that the first Kedusha was not a valid Kedusha. And therefore, the second Kedushin, just 1 second, Any Rabbana v'kiddushe tosa. Oh, I'm sorry. He's referring to the Sheni, right? Because he's saying that you're allowed to go back to your first husband. So it means she was never married to the second husband, and therefore it's not Machzir Gushoso. Why wasn't she married to the second husband? Because she was married to the first husband, and the first husband never gave her a get. So the second Kiddushin was Kiddushay Tos. So she now could go back to the Rishon. And he adds here a comment, which I wanted to share with you. He says, V'ena kol yodim shetzrichnu lekabel get min hasheni k'dei linoseh l'rishon. The requirement of a get from the sheni is not public knowledge. And here's the case. Yotza oleh kol mizeh u'mizeh. There's a rumor going around that she was married by both Reuven and Shimon. But there's no clear-cut testimony with regard to the Kedushei Sheni, Kedushei Shimon. Mao, Omer Rav Papa, Af Bezu, Megarish Rishon Menosei Sheni. Now, the Kedushei Sheni is only a kol. And Rav Huna is going to say, according to Rav Papa, that the first Makadesh is going to have to give her a get, and she can marry the second one. But it's got to be that way and not the opposite. Because once again, if we're going to allow her to resume her relationship with the first husband, people are going to say that it's Machzir Gushoso liachar sheniseis. Ameimer Omar, Ameimer disagrees, Muteres l'shneinim. And here we have the famous Mimonavshach of the Ritva. Ritva says the following. Why is she allowed to go back to her first husband? Mimonavshach. Imlon is kachalo klal. If the first husband never married her, then it's not Machzir Gushoso. She's Muteres l'achar Gerush Hashem. And even if I grant you that the Kedusha was valid, we're not going to be choshesh for a kol that the Kedusha Sheni were Kedushin, because it's a kol sheyotza liachar ha'erusin. And we paskin above that ein choshen lo, a kol after erusin, we're not choshesh. And therefore, mimanavshach muteres l'shneihem. And here on the top of that sadi, the Gemara concludes with Hilchasa Muteres L'Shneihem. We accept Ameimar La'aloch. And this leads us in Mirz Hashem tomorrow to Daf Sadi, which I believe will give us a siyum on Masechet Gittin. So Blineda tomorrow we'll try to also give a little bit of introduction to Masechet Kiddushin. Maybe we'll learn through the Mishnah in the beginning of the Gemara in Kiddushin Daf Beis, just to get a little bit ahead of ourselves. Okay then? So let me wish you a great day. Thank you so much. Shavua Tov.